Cairo, Seattle.
It's time to get schooled with the professor, John Clayton.
Welcome to Schooled with the Professor, and of course our guest is going to be Steve Mariucci from the NFL Network, and the topic's going to be coaching in the National Football League, what it's like now, how it's changed, how it's changing, and what's going on. And of course, the timing of this is, I guess, unfortunately appropriate because we had the first firing of the year. Jeff Fisher, head coach of the Los Angeles Rams, fired on Monday, replaced by John Fossil, the special teams coach. Kind of a weird deal in the sense that now you're going to a first-time coach on the shortest week possible. You have virtually no time to prepare, and you take away the coach, and Jeff Fisher, who is considered to be one of the best coaches in preparing for division games, particularly on a short week. But that's the way things are in the NFL. And one thing I think that you can see is that it doesn't change in the sense, and it's been like this really for over 25 years, and that's really since the advent of the salary cap, is that you can almost count year in and year out, there's going to be 7 coaching changes a year. And some years, in fact, there was one year where there was 11. This year could be 5, could be 7, could be 9. In this 2016 season, there were, going into the year, 7 new coaches. Ironically, all on offense. Now, that included Mike Mularkey, who was the interim coach of the Tennessee Titans and now got the full-time job on a 3-year deal. But what's happened now is that you have great impatience of the owners and I think unrealistic expectations. Give you some examples. And of course, this is where I think it's bad for the coaching community because, you just don't have the time to build things up. The way it is with the new collective bargaining agreement, you need to build through the draft because free agency, you can get players, but they may work, they may not work. Sometimes you get them hurt and all of a sudden you have nothing in return. You have no cap room to be able to replace them. So, literally a coach has about 2 years to turn things over, and most coaches are given 4-year deals. So you get into the 3rd year, and now it's either you're successful or not successful, and then you may get a pass and get a 4th year, but if not, you get fired. Then you have owners like Jim Haslam, who doesn't mind doing one and dones. I mean, you fire a coach after 1 year, and if that doesn't work, you bring in another coach and you fire him after another year. But that sets a franchise back. But here's the tough part for a coach. You now have to try to manage something that is really kind of tough. Look at the situation for Rex Ryan in Buffalo. Rex Ryan goes there, accomplished coach, had 2 championship runs, at least to a championship game with the New York Jets. Then, of course, the roster started slipping each year, and he eventually loses his job. But he goes to Buffalo. You're in a division with the New England Patriots. Every year, the New England Patriots are going to win the division. So now you're at the mercy of trying to get a wild card. And that's in many ways out of your control because, to get a wild card, you've got to think about winning 10 games. If you're lucky, you may get it at 9, you may get it at 8. And so last year, Rex didn't do a good job. He had a defense that, coming off a great sack season with Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator, they were among the league leaders in sacks. And then they come back and they just didn't get to the quarterback. They couldn't stop the run. Had a bad year. So 8-8. So now this year he comes in and the owner pretty much puts a quiet mandate to make the playoffs. And it comes at the time that the AFC West gets an easy schedule and was able to play the AFC South and the NFC South. And so the stakes go high where you can have the 5th seed, the first wild card, getting 10 or 11 wins, and maybe Denver if they can get 10 wins. And so now you have the expectations of trying to win 10, and you're still playing the Patriots and everything else. It's tough. And so that makes it difficult. And of course, what further makes it difficult is the state of college football, because college football is the feeder for the National Football League as far as talent. But the problem is they're not preparing teams and players for the NFL. Quarterbacks aren't going to be ready to learn the pro set offense unless they have a pro experience, and most of them are air raid quarterbacks or pro set quarterbacks. It affects so many other positions. You don't have fullbacks. You don't have offensive linemen with your hand on the ground. So now you have to come in as a coach. You have to convert guys in a quick sense, and you don't have the time to do it. You get 10 OTAs, organized practices. You get a mini camp of 2-3 days, and then you come back and you go get a training camp where you only have 1 practice a day and limited hitting. So it's tough. And so you're now in a position where, if you're in that 2nd or 3rd year and things aren't turning around, and with the way the rosters are, you need 2 years to turn around an offense, 2 years to turn around a defense, and you're only got 2 years into this, and you get fired. That's why, I mean, you look at some of the coaching things, and you just kind of shake your head. And then, the bad teams, the teams that have been bad for so many years, keep going through that revolving door of coaches, and it just doesn't work out. Very, very difficult thing in the National Football League, and one I guess you just have to kind of live with and try to do the best you can with, but that's just the way it is. So, what is going to happen now is, we got the Rams, they have to try to go figure out somebody to replace Jeff Fisher. Do you go into the college ranks? Well, I mean, yeah, you go for Jim Harbaugh, but Jim's not leaving Michigan. You call maybe a guy like Pete Carroll, but he's already locked into contract in Seattle. So now, unless you come up with some great idea of somebody that maybe a personnel guy knows or general manager knows, then you're just hiring the best assistant coach who's never been a head coach. And so now you have the combination of a head coach learning on the job, and the combination of a quarterback you may draft that doesn't know what to do in an NFL system. Same thing with offensive linemen. I mean, that's in many ways what happened this year to the Los Angeles Rams. They drafted Jared Goff. He's an air raid quarterback. Wasn't ready to come in, and of course, I think you can see right now he's still struggling to try to catch up. He's had 4 starts. He's lost all 4, or 3 starts, and now he has a chance to be 0-4. And so now you got such a bad situation there, and it's just almost you just kind of shake your head. It's like, what's going on if you were going to try to be a coach? And so you just don't have the time to do it. But of course, any coach wants that opportunity. Look at Hugh Jackson. He takes a Raider team as a head coach. 1 year, goes 8-8. Al Davis says 8-8's not good enough. And of course, until this year, and really you go all the way back to 2002, Raiders hadn't had a winning season. They had Tom Cable there, won 8-8. Hugh Jackson went 8-8. Both lost their jobs because 8-8 wasn't good enough. And yet they go for 14, 13 years without a winning season. Bizarre. Jack Del Rio comes in, fixes it up within 2 years because they were able to build the roster and the offense. And now they've got a great young quarterback in Derek Carr. And that's the other thing. You can talk about what it is to be a head coach and how good it is to be a head coach and how valuable it is to head coach. Head coach without a quarterback is going to struggle. Tom Brady, clearly maybe the greatest quarterback who's ever played the game, and Bill Belichick, maybe the greatest coach in the NFL history. And, of course, that combination has been just unbelievable for Super Bowls, championships, division winners, all those different things. But you look at the teams in that division that have gone through so many quarterbacks. I mean, Miami, from Dan Marino through all those quarterbacks to then finally get to Ryan Tannehill. And then here it is, they're on the verge of maybe getting to the playoffs, and Tannehill blows out, well, not totally blows out, but gets an ACL injury, and so his season is over. So that's one of the bizarre things. Then, of course, the other bizarre thing is some of the just transitions you have trying to get to this. So really, you need a quarterback, you need years to build it up, and they're not getting that. But it's still coaching, it's systems, it's developing. You've got to find a way to be able to adjust to times and get a faster pace and all those different things. So we will come back and we'll talk to Steve Mariucci of the NFL Network, who was a head coach in Detroit, San Francisco, and 1 year at Cal. He's seen it all ways, college, pros, you name it. He's seen the West Coast offense at its best, and he's been a great coach and a great commentator. We talk to him next on Schooled with the Professor. Pleased to be joined by Steve Mariucci of the NFL Network, and the topic, of course, is coaching in the National Football League. Kind of an interesting subject because, we're at that stage now where, of course, it's the worst time of year to be a coach, I guess, in many ways, because hot seats are burning up. And, Steve, how are you, first of all?
Well, John, I'm great. Thanks. It's fun to be here in Seattle. I always love watching games in this stadium because this crowd is crazy. And it's going to be interesting to see, Seattle rally back to represent themselves in the playoffs. They've been up and down, and then, of course, we have the Rams who just lost their head coach. So it's going to be an interesting game. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, of course, that's the interesting thing. I mean, what do you think the state of coaching now in the National Football League? Because, I mean, here's Jeff Fisher, respected coach, trying to make the move, and all of a sudden on a short week, he loses his job. And now we've got other coaches that, have to await their fate over the course of the next 3 weeks. Is it tougher now to coach in the NFL than it was many years ago?
Well, there are always coaching changes, right, John? Every year, what do we average? 6 or 7 a year. First time I was honored to be a head coach in the National Football League in San Francisco, there were actually 11 coaching changes, if you can imagine that, 11 changes back here. And so it's a revolving door, you know that. It's a privilege to be a coach in the league. Has it changed? Yes, it has. One thing that comes to mind in terms of how has it changed is, let's just talk about social media real quick, because everybody, almost everybody, coaches, players, teams, and, a coach is always, worrying about sometimes guys read too much into this. I have a friend, Tom Izzo at Michigan State, right, the basketball coach, and he just dreads it because he says, all my kids, they'll read great stuff on social media about them, so they all think they're Michael Jordan, or they get the most vulgar criticism that you can imagine. And he says, I don't know how they do it from the way ups and the way downs. It's not realistic. So I don't know. It's some of those kinds of things have certainly changed.
Well, and the one thing that's interesting is that, to me, I think one of the toughest parts about coaching is how different college coaches are, in the sense that in many ways with spread offenses and air raid offenses, they prepare offensive players and even some defensive players not in the NFL way. And now with that short window a coach has to start to win, it makes that even tougher.
But you're right. All these spread offenses, not only in college but in high school, that's not only the trend, that's the norm. And so you have linemen that don't drive block much. You have runners that have very limited, types of run plays that they're used to running. You have quarterbacks in shotgun. You have quarterbacks not in a huddle, learning how to be a leader and remind their team to get out of bounds and all those sort of things. And so there's a learning curve with all these guys. You have defensive linemen that are having to play run-pass options, and it's kind of tough. Do I play the run? Do I pass rush? So it's kind of a little bit different game right now, like you mentioned.
Could you see NFL teams adopting kind of that college spread air raid type offense, or why wouldn't it work in the NFL?
Well, it is gradually working. The fast pace, look at the sideline, get the play, see how many plays you can run, consecutively has been tried. Chip Kelly did it in Philly. He's trying to do some of it in San Francisco. I think defensive coordinators have kind of caught up with all of that in terms of being able to substitute or make defensive calls quickly. Like I said earlier, there's only one team, John, that runs the ball more than throws, and that's the Dallas Cowboys. It's like 50.8% run, and a lot of that is because they're winning at the end of the game. And so this is a passing league. It's more of a shotgun league. Did you know, I coached Steve Young, right? Mm-hmm. He never went shotgun. Once in his career, never was in shotgun. Brett Favre didn't go into shotgun until about his 8th year or so, and then he started gradually doing it a little more and more. Nowadays, Aaron Rodgers only was in shotgun one snap last week. Under center, one snap. And so it's changing, and we are changing more to a spread 3-4 wide receiver game. But I hope to God that we never lose sight of the fullback and the tight end and play smash mouth, run control, ball control, clock control, because your defense needs it. Your defense needs to be tough and able to stop those kinds of offenses. And if an offense is just spread in practice, the defense is essentially softer.
In what ways, if you have a spread offense that is tried in the league, how long does it take for a defensive coach to be able to figure it out? Because clearly in the NFL, you're going to have better athletes on defense than you're going to have in college. And those athletes, of course, can be around and be coached for several more years. How long does it take to figure out a spread offense?
Well, and there are a lot of different kinds of spread offenses, John. Just say if that quarterback's always in shotgun, let's just say there's always 3 or 4, sometimes 5 receivers. But some spread offenses are back there to throw the ball most often, okay? Some spread offenses are zone read kind of option spread offenses, which you have an athletic quarterback that most of the time will lead the team in rushing. That kind of quarterback not always is a NFL prototype guy. He might be a shorter guy, he might be a more athletic guy, whatever that is. So I think we're going to see it gradually, infiltrate our league. We see it right now. There's a lot of spread offense. I think you have to have a mix of some power offense, some zone trap games, some of that, and then a little bit of mix with spread. And I like the zone read, even non-running quarterbacks will fully once in a while pulling the ball and reading it. So I think they're being a little bit creative, like the colleges now.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I think, going back to what you had said a little bit earlier. I mean, of course, Mike Holmgren was always a big believer that's like, we're not going to go into shotgun. We're going to try to run everything. And it's like, we're going to take our plays, we're going to run them, and we're going to force the team to stop. And it was a matter of execution. And, of course, that execution, particularly in the West Coast offense, carried for so many years.
Yeah, and it's just a preference. Mike came from San Francisco where Joe Montana never went. I shouldn't say never. He went once, and the ball sailed over his head, so then it became never after that. And then Steve Young, same thing. And then when he was in Green Bay, Brett Favre, same thing.
Yeah, that, of course, is one of the things that you have to kind of beware of because you don't want to make mistakes and make turns. Where would you say the state of the West Coast offense is in current NFL? Because obviously with the spreads and things of that nature, teams doing variety of things, where does the West Coast offense now fit to the way it was when you coached it and Mike coached it?
Well, if you really go back to the West Coast offense, John, you had receivers with their hand on the ground, and you had two receivers, a tight end, and two backs most of the time. If you remember the drive with Joe Montana, remember when he said, "Hey, there's John Candy in the stands." Remember against Cincinnati?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that was a 2-minute drive, and most of it was with regular personnel. It wasn't shotgun 4 wides, and it wasn't that at all. And so it's evolved into more 3 and 4 wide receiver sets. It still has a lot of the same principles, the same reads and progressions as the Paul Brown West Coast offense, Bill Walsh West Coast offense, but it's different formations and personnel groups. Obviously, what's changed the most is the run game part of it and play action.
Yeah, and I know that's the one thing, and I would imagine, how much, because, you coached in college, you coached in the pros. How tough is it for a pure spread air raid coach who has no pro experience to come into the NFL and try to work in? Because obviously Chip Kelly came in, had 2 good years, and now he's struggled for the past 2. Do you foresee more of that, or is it just very tough?
It's tough. And I came from college, John, from the Cal to the San Francisco 49ers, but luckily I had experience in the NFL as an assistant in Green Bay. And that was benefit, and in the USFL, because the football is similar in some regards, similar rules, but what's different is you're not dealing with a 19-year-old kid that's trying to figure out who he is in life. You're dealing with men, some of them with families, some of them making more money than you. The dynamics changes dramatically, and so working with and dealing with a professional athlete is a different challenge than working with a kid that you just recruited, and you're now a second parent to him as he leaves his home. Football stuff, a lot of it's the same, but it's the interpersonal stuff and the coaching and the relationship that's dramatically different.
No question about it. And you're right about the idea. And this really kind of peaked starting at the beginning of free agency in the early 90s, because it's been unfortunately very consistent in 6 to 7 new coaches come into the league each year. We saw this past year 7 new head coaches, including one, Mike Mariucci, who was an interim. And the expectation is probably this year it's going to be 5, 6, or 7, which I don't know if it's necessarily the right thing, probably not the right thing to do, because, to build up a roster is more tough nowadays.
Yeah, and they're going to change coaches that don't reach their expectations. This is going to be interesting tonight. We have an interim coach, John Bostel, with the Rams. Certainly those guys that are capable, whether it's Harbaugh or Nick Saban, but they all have had NFL experience. And that is so beneficial, rather than just bringing a guy that's a little wet behind the ears. But there's so much of a learning curve if you haven't been an assistant in the National Football League. That's why guys get, recycled and get another chance or 2 in the National Football League, because they have that NFL experience. It's valuable.
How difficult has it been made with the most recent collective bargaining agreement that limits the number of times you can be in padded practices, limits what you can do in training camp, and limits the time that you can have with players.
Offensive linemen, and especially young offensive linemen, are not getting developed as quickly as they need to be. Not as much practice time. And, when they do the collective bargaining agreement, I think it seems like the owners sort of won the financial part of it, and they're very happy with that. And the players felt that, well, we're going to reduce the time, the wear and tear on our bodies, so maybe our careers will have a little more longevity because we're not getting worn out year-round. Well, and then there's only 14 padded practices the entire season. High schools have more padded practices than that. So do colleges. And so you can't practice pass rush all the time in pajamas. You got to be in full pads and store your run game stuff in pads to protect yourself. And when you're not practicing as often or in pads as often, I think we're missing something. We got to find a way to change that a little bit, I think.
We've seen two coaches come through the West Coast that have been very successful on both sides, Jim Harbaugh and Pete Carroll, both in coaching in college and in the pros. What is it about their unique abilities that allowed them to be so successful on both levels?
Well, they're two different guys, okay? Jim Harbaugh certainly had a heck of a playing career in the pros, and he grew up. He was a young assistant at the Raiders, just getting his feet wet in pro coaching. But then he took over the USD job, non-scholarship program. That my son went to school there, by the way. But then worked his way up. But he succeeded there. He succeeded at Stanford, at the 49ers, and now in Michigan. He's a heck of he's a winner. Whether you like him or not, whether you think he's quirky or different or whatever that is, that's beside the point. He's a good football coach. Pete Carroll, on the other hand, he started at UOP at different places and as an assistant in the pro. He didn't have that playing career, but he's got the energy of a 26-year-old, and so the players feed off of that. And if you've watched his practices, he's got the music going on, and it's unbelievable over there. So both coaches are unique, both are different, but both are very fine football coaches.
That's great. Well, how much do you miss coaching?
I'm in the arena talking about football all the time with my current job at the NFL Network for 11 years now, and I miss the prep. I miss the stadium, the arena. I mean, there's no other job like it. It's so unique. You get goosebumps just thinking about it. I don't miss the instability of it all. I moved my wife, John, 18 times, and so trying to climb the ladder and this and that. So there's some things that are awesome. Such a privilege to be a coach in the National Football League. And then there's a demand on it, too. You got to be willing to move, or you got to be willing to, be away from your family a lot. And so those are some of the things that I don't miss.
Well, one thing we like is watching you on the NFL Network, and, of course, it's just going to be great to catch up with you during this Thursday night game. Steve Mariucci, thanks for joining us.
All right, John, I'll see you later tonight. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, Mooch, thanks. I'll see you. See you tonight.
You bet.
Okay.
Forget it.
Good news, everyone! It's time
to ask the professor.
I know it's glamorous and the parties are great, but you'll end up spending every dollar you make on jewelry and skin-tight pants.
Welcome back to Schooled with a Professor. Remember, each week you get a chance to ask me any question you have relating to the podcast. Just get us on Twitter and use the hashtag ClaytonSchooled. This week I talked to Steve Mariucci of the NFL Network, who coached in both college football and the NFL. Our question comes from Dennis in Syracuse. Dennis asked, what makes certain coaches more successful in the NFL than in college and vice versa? Well, I think the biggest thing is, the ability first to have a good system, because you have to have something that you can teach. And I think also it helps to be able to be like a Pete Carroll, where you be able to relate to players, because you can see some of the problems that Chip Kelly had when he went to Philadelphia. And even though he had success with 10 over the first 2 years, then 10 wins in each of the first 2 years, his communication wasn't the best, and sometimes he lost his players. And also the system was one that was so fast paced, by the end of the year his players wore out. Well, I mean, he's still trying to fix that in San Francisco, but at the moment that's not working. But that's more talent than it is coaching. But one, you have to have a good system. And, in most cases, if you're going to be a head coach, unlike Pete Carroll, where you're not going to have control of some personnel, you're at the mercy of the general manager getting you talent. So first, you have to be able to work with the coaches and work with all the assistants and make sure that you have a good system for the players. Then you need to get players. Then, of course, you have to kind of motivate players and make sure that they have fun doing things. And that's where I think Pete has been so successful. First couple years back when he was with the Jets, when he was with the Patriots, he didn't know exactly what he was doing, but he had a lot of ideas, a lot of energy, and he didn't have any control of personnel. So he goes to USC. He learns, it's like, I'm just going to implement the things that I've learned through the years, and I'm controlling personnel, so I'm going to be able to go get what you need. So that's the first step. And, of course, he was able to figure out, I want long, angular cornerbacks. I want quick pass rushers. I want big offensive linemen. I want power running. And he knew exactly what he wanted. He was able to put it together, and boom, has a great run here in Seattle. That's the success. But the problem is, what helps is that you have the experience of the NFL, and that's what Pete had. Many years as an assistant, had great teachers before him, been in so many different systems, both in San Francisco, work with Monty Kimmett. He learned so much from so many good coaches. He was able to implement it. That's the problem if you're going to be a pure college coach with no NFL experience. You're going to struggle because you don't know exactly what the NFL game is. And unlike in college, if you're a head coach, you're not going to have the control that you have of the roster, because you may have to answer to a general manager, you may have to answer to an owner, whatever that's going to be. So that really is what the plan is, and that's the strategy. So overall, you just need to find a way to be able to come in and have the right system. You have to have the energy. For example, look at Gus Bradley in Jacksonville. He had the right system. He brings the Pete Carroll system. You have the music, you have the competition, just didn't have the players. And so he goes through and now in his fourth year, and it looks like he's going to get fired. He was able to get a quarterback, and in his second year, quarterback came on well, but the defense wasn't good. Then this year, the defense is ranked in the top 4 or 5, but the quarterback hasn't been good. So now he's going to lose his job, but the system still works. Look at Dan Quinn. He goes to Atlanta with Pete Carroll's system. Got off to a great start. He had a quarterback in Matt Ryan. They win close games. They win comeback victories. And so now all of a sudden things are going great. Then in the middle of the season, big lull. Everything falls apart because the defense didn't have talent. Then they bounce back. They finish 8-8. Now this year, things are working out because defense a little better, still has some holes. Offense is better. Second year with Kyle Shanahan working with Matt Ryan, and so on that they're sitting there 8-5 with a great chance to win the NFC South. So you need the system. You need the experience to be in the NFL, because just coming straight out of college, and it's very few coaches that come straight from college with limited experience in the NFL that can succeed. Nick Saban tried it, and you go through the whole list of names. But if you have that background in the NFL, like a Jim Harbaugh, like a Pete Carroll, then you got a shot. And, of course, going to college gives you such a great advantage in the current NFL system, because now, you're used to adapting to younger players. You understand their needs. You understand what they like, what they don't like, what you can help grow. And that's where a guy like a Jim Harbaugh and a Pete Carroll can be so successful. And to carry that into the NFL, because, you're going to be trying to get as many good young players on the field as possible and create an environment. And that's why the music works, and the competition, the basketball that they'll play in the meeting rooms and stuff like that, have one-on-one competition. Those things work because it goes to the young players, makes them have fun. And if they have fun, they're going to give you a little bit extra effort, and you can convert that effort into wins, which is what good coaches can do. If you come with a standard idea that you can't adjust, change, adapt, you're not going to succeed. The game is so fast, and also the coaches are so good, because you may have an innovation that you figured out, and within a couple weeks, defensive coaches will be able to stop it, or if it's a defensive scheme, offensive coaches will be able to figure out how to beat it. So it's like you can't be a one-trick pony. You have to have it. So that's why it's tough if you're going to be young and try to succeed. And then the other problem is you can come in there and have a first couple years of success, maybe go to the playoffs, but then the next thing you know, if the roster isn't good enough, you can still lose your job after a couple years, even though you make one trip to the playoffs. Very difficult in the National Football League, but that's coaching. And that's, of course, what you like to kind of see. And unfortunately, each year, 6 to 7 coaches lose their jobs. It started this year with Jeff Fisher. We will see how it finishes. That's it for this week's edition of Schooled. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.